Hi, this is Kelly with the Two Broads Talking Politics podcast. This is the 15th episode of our Vote Her In series with author Rebecca Sive, where we look at the movement to elect our first woman president. On today's episode, we speak with Chicago City Clerk Anna Valencia. If you'd like to hear the other episodes in this series, you can go to twobroadstalkingpolitics.com/voteherin or find them in our regular feed anywhere podcasts are found. Hey everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and we are on today with the 15th episode of our Vote Her In series, where we look at the movement to elect our first woman president. I am joined, as usual, by my partner in this Vote Her In venture, author Rebecca Sive. Hi, Rebecca.
Good morning, Kelly.
And joining us today, we have the City Clerk of Chicago, Anna Valencia. Hi, Anna.
Good morning, Kelly and Rebecca.
Good morning, Anna. Great to have you on
Thank
the
you for
show.
having.
We're looking forward.
I'm honored to be here.
Well, you know what? We wanted to jump right in because, as I was thinking about the kind of conversation we wanted to have with you, I went back and looked at the interview I did with you for my book, Vote Her In, and realized as I was reflecting on it that you may not be the only person who's had this experience, but I think you're probably one of the few women electeds who served in an executive capacity as a campaign manager, as an appointed official, and as an elected official. And I thought, given that special experience you've had, it would be really good for our listeners to hear from you about how and why you chose that executive path and what you've learned from it and can share with us.
Definitely. Well, thank you, ladies, for having me. I love talking about anything women and women empowered and journeys of women. I love listening to podcasts because they also inspire me, hearing other people's journeys. But for me, it kind of really started, I don't like to say by accident, but by chance, how I got involved in politics. I grew up downstate Illinois, about 5 hours south of Chicago. My dad in the trades, my mom at a nonprofit, and I was first in my family to go to college at the University of Illinois. And at the summer going into my senior year of college, I got an opportunity to be on a local judge's race. And at the point where actually my father got me on the race, the woman that cut his hair, he had been talking to, and she said, "Oh, my husband's a lawyer. He's running for judge." And my dad said my daughter's interested in politics and government. And 48 hours later, I had myself a great internship. And really, that opened my eyes to something that I never even saw, a possibility of being able to go out and talk to voters and try to, run on your issues and get good people elected. And so what I thought I was going to be a lawyer, because in my community, lawyers were what were considered successful. And I think my father desperately wanted me to be a lawyer and change the trajectory of our family. But it wasn't really for me. And I didn't go to law school. I ended up, from that connection of the judge's race, met some folks that were working for then Senator Obama, who was running. I graduated in 2007 of May, so great time for the president just to be kicking off. And I actually, 2 weeks after college, got a job in Virginia with the state party as an organizer. So I packed up my bags, lived in supporter housing, knocking doors 7 days a week, and started my first journey into politics. And to answer your question, Rebecca, you really don't know what you can be if you don't see it. And when I came back to Illinois after the Virginia cycle, it was a very small network of other folks that worked in campaigns that recognized something that I didn't see, of talent and hustle and hard work, that kind of helped me put myself on a path to jump on different campaigns. What I did notice, though, being in campaigns and kind of moving up in this world, were not a lot of women and not a lot of people of color. And for me, when I finally did get a seat at the table as Senator Durbin's campaign manager at 28, my first real leadership responsibility, I noticed there were still lacking. And in fact, I tell this story to young people. I went into a room to talk about the coordinated campaign in 2014, and there I sat with, the Speaker of the House and the state Senate president, the governor at the time, and Senator Durbin, and we all brought one person, staff member, and I looked around, and I was the only one in the room. And so
Right.
that was my kind of opportunity to step in and really lead and understand the power of my voice, and led the meeting successfully. And we got everyone's approval to do the coordinated campaign, and we moved. So for me, it's been a great experience to understand the very basics of getting your foot in the door, and as an organizer and campaign side, to understand campaign strategy and still see in the ranks of top campaigns not a lot of women. And then coming into the executive branch, the greatest joy I've had is being able to change that narrative, to actually have on my 8 senior staff member, 7 women and 1 very strong, brave man on our team, and really be able to transcend what executive leadership looks like and their lived experiences, which is a very exciting part of my job.
So can you share with us a little about the kinds of skills and approaches to the work that you want to share with, as you put it, that one brave man and all of those wonderful women?
Yes. I think the biggest thing for women is sometimes we don't always have the confidence. I see some men, especially men of color, come in with some imposter syndrome, right? And not knowing if they have what it takes, the skills or the right education or the right resume or background. And so it took a lot of coaching and seeking mentors and finding people who have done this work to talk about it with, so that you can build up that confidence to speak up when you're at the table. I also find that when women are in roles of leadership, that we are very collaborative in spirit, that we want to hear people. Maybe it's because we've been looked over so much that we want to be able to hear, but also listen, and then take that listening and actually make action out of it. It's one thing to do listening tables and listening tours, but if you're not courageous or bold enough to act on what you're hearing, well, then you're not really getting the job done. So I'm really trying to expand the table, but also empower the table to speak up, to be able to articulate their viewpoints, their personal experiences, their lived experiences, because that's when the magic happens. That's when the best policy happens, is when you're able to get your team to share the lived experiences and create policies that will actually be effective because all the different perspectives are taken into account.
So I just wanted to push on that a little bit about those lived experiences. And if you could talk a little bit about sort of what that means, what sorts of things in your current role as city clerk are you able to sort of draw on those lived experiences? I know you're trying to put through a number of reforms, and how does sort of reflecting on your life and having your staff reflect on their lives, what that means in terms of the kinds of things you can do as city clerk, the kinds of policies you can put into place.
I'll give you 3 examples. One, I will say that's the most recent, is our fines and fees reform collaborative that we launched. I launched in December. And I launched this with a lot of parents and department heads and other elected officials because I heard so many stories and lived experiences of government putting barriers in people's lives instead of removing those barriers. When it came to city stickers and debt collections, bankruptcy, all the things that were kind of happening with my office. My office was responsible for some of it, but there are other departments that were also responsible for it. And you heard different lived experiences. For example, the CTA bus driver who was a father of 3 on the West Side, who shared his story about losing his job at CTA because of $5,000 and city sticker ticket debt alone, and was unable to get on a payment plan to pay that off. And so there was this debt spiral that was happening to him and his family. And when you have those folks at the table telling you their narrative or their lived experiences, that helps you create a better policy that will help impact those communities that have been, preyed upon, if you will. So that's one example. Another example I will say, from my team zone experience. We were sitting around one day talking about how we got our foot in the door in government and how we even knew government was a career, elected office or a policy position, being a chief legal counsel, being a community outreach person. And a lot of them are very similar narratives. A lot of them are first in their family to go to college, and there wasn't a career booth that said sign up for government careers. So what we wanted to do and what we did is we started exposing how can we in our world as city clerk use our platform to do as much good as possible and expand just on our basic operations. So with CPS, Chicago Public Schools, we launched a civic engagement program for high school youth called Next Gen City Council. This will be our third year entering in fall. We work with 10 neighborhood high schools from Roseland at Sanger and Roseland to Benito Juarez and Pilsen to Michelle Clark and Austin community. And we work with high school students to teach about local government and how you can be civically engaged in local government and make huge impact now. And you don't have to wait until college or be an adult. You can know what's happening now. And what's been the beauty of this is being able to see students come in and find their voice and sit tall in the alderman's seats and collaborate and talk to other students from across the city about issues that are happening to them, and then creating their own city ordinances that really impact what is happening in the community, and then seeing them speak about these ordinances and voting on them. And it is beautiful to watch. And this actually, after this last Next Gen City Council in May, one of the ordinances, the top 4 that finished, that they got the highest votes, I am personally introducing into City Council so that they can see that their work actually made a law happen. So I think those 2 examples, and the third, which is near and dear to my heart, and I know to you too as well, is women and girls. So last October, I launched a women and girls group, working group, the status of women and girls, and we came up with 22 recommendations with 120 women from all walks of life, from the hotel workers at Unite Here to, Executive Vice President at Northern Trust, to everyone in the middle, high school students, college students, et cetera. And we said, you know what? We're not going to wait for DC. We're not going to wait for Springfield. We're going to save ourselves. And with the 22 recommendations that we came out on March 8th this year, 4 of those, one of them are already done. Our top recommendation, the top 4, one is done with a Fair Week work ordinance. We are launching on Friday our task force to look at 100 high schools in Chicago on their sex education, health education, along with Dr. Janice Jackson at Chicago Public Schools. We're working with the Illinois State Police and Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton about how to clear up the backlog for sexual assault evidence kits. And hopefully by January, we'll be launching the date and location for our Young Girls Summit, which will be next fall in 2020, with 500 young girls coming together from 13 to 24 to talk about what does safety in Chicago mean to them here, and how can we support them to thrive in Chicago. So it's very exciting things. Some are operational that touch my office, but having this executive power, and I've really taken it another step further in creating policies that can do more by using this platform.
So, Anna, you are really an inspiration, I know. And I know that when we look around, and you mentioned a couple of people, other women in important positions in the state of Illinois, and there are women in similar positions in other states. This obviously is something very different than it used to be. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about you've talked a little bit about the policy partnerships, but how you see this partnership with women like the Lieutenant Governor and others rolling out as we look toward the next presidential and the possibility of electing a woman president. And I would just sort of note parenthetically that if we are to elect a Democratic president, it will be due to women voters. So I'm wondering how you see that opportunity to organize.
Yeah, I think it's imperative that women support women, and that women who are empowered empower other women. It's a no-brainer, actually. If we're going to get to the White House, that has to happen. And so I've been very fortunate to have these partnerships with some of the women leading in Illinois and here in Chicago and Cook County to really support the work. And how do we amplify each other's work? How do we amplify each other's voices? And one thing that I'm hoping to do again this fall, Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, we all took a bus last fall or last election to go out and support her and to organize and knock on doors. We had to drive an hour and a half out of Chicago, but there were 25 women that some didn't even know her that just got on a bus and went, because how crucial it is to make sure we had women represent us in Congress. And even more so, having an African-American woman and that part of the state represent us was huge. And so I think it's imperative we do that again, that we, get out the vote, that we travel to different states, that we talk to our family members, our neighbors, our colleagues, other women who may not be as engaged in politics or be engaged as civics, that we have to push them too, because at this time around, voting is not even enough. We have to do so much more than just voting. And we have to get uncomfortable, and that's okay. We have to get out of our comfort zones, our safety nets, and our little pockets of comfort that we find in the city. And because there are women here in Chicago, in Cook County, other parts of the state that may not have the same views that we have. So we have to find ways to communicate with them to say, what can we find to compromise on? I'll give you a quick story. Over the weekend, I met this lovely woman who is a Republican, and we were told not to talk about politics. Our friend made it very clear we are different sides, but she started talking to me about politics, and we found ourselves at the intersection where we could actually agree. As a conservative, she was pro-choice. As a conservative, we agreed on, she was a gun owner, but she agreed on background checks. As a conservative, we believed in climate change. And so where can we go back to find those bread and butter issues that women care about and not get caught up in the extreme right or extreme left, find ourselves to find common ground for the good of women in the White House, women in the governor's mansion, now women in the mayor's office, which is very exciting in Chicago, and women in a lot of other executive roles that we have traditionally been overlooked. And that's what I really want to lend my life to, is making sure that my legacy is young women and young women of color, particularly with my shared experience or similar, having the opportunity to get into these roles, stay in these roles, and be successful in these roles. And so that's what I hope to lend my life stream to, and see someone in the White House and support them too.
Mm-hmm. Could you give a little maybe advice for anyone who's thinking about either running for office themselves or wants to help their daughters maybe think about running for office, what you want to make sure they're thinking about and focusing on?
I think for the daughters, that confidence building can never start early enough. Just say yes to everything she wants to do. Never stifle her dreams. Nothing is too big. My parents were always, always supportive of everything I wanted to do, even if they didn't feel like they were. My dad told his friends that I was going through a stage when I was doing campaign work and that I was going to be out of that stage. And I remember when I got my first business card with the Senate Democrats, he was like excited that I had a real job. He won't admit that now, but they were always supportive. Even if they didn't understand what I was trying to do, they never stifled my dreams, which I can never say enough. So if you have young daughters, just be supportive in whatever they want to do. And second, I think for women that want to run for office, just do it. There is never the right time. You're never going to have all the pieces together. But if it feels right for you, then do it. And I think raising money was probably one of the hardest things that women candidates have to overcome, that we as women have to be better at job at writing the checks for other women and making sure that we volunteer on their campaign, help with petitions, write checks, support them in any way that we can. And so when you decide to run, I think it's easier to kind of get the support. I think the hardest thing we do, and we need to do a better job, is once those women get into office, how do we still support them? Because it can be very lonely at the top, and especially as a woman of color and being young, being 34, coming into office at 32, I was very overwhelmed about how to lead. I was unsure how to authentically lead like a woman because I had seen only men lead. And it took some therapy, some really other strong women leaders of color to turn to. There's not a lot of us. and a supportive husband and supportive friends that really helped rally around me to make sure that I could be successful in this position. Because if I'm not successful, the mayor's not successful, Juliana Stratton is not successful, Kim Fox is not successful, Dr. Janice Jackson's not successful, then it'll be hard for any other woman to come and take on those roles.
So one other thing, Anna, I love your phrase, authentically leading like a woman. And I wonder if you could just in closing share with us, what are the specific aspects of that leading? I know you mentioned collaborative efforts before, but, what are the qualities? Because after all, women have to win the same way men do. They have to get more votes, right? And whether it's in the campaign or you're presenting something to the city council. So can you share with us just a little bit about what those qualities are?
I definitely think relationship building. Relationships is everything in politics. And this is universal besides just gender. You have to be kind to people. You have to hear people. You have to give them an answer and be responsive. No is an answer, right, but don't leave them in the gray area. If you don't have relationships, there's no collaboration. People have to trust you. They have to realize if you say you're going to do something, that you do it. And if you can't do it, to give them an answer and why. Maybe it's not this time, but the next time. So I think you have to be communicative. I cannot underscore that. If you cannot communicate properly, whether that's a media message, whether that's, a town hall, whether that's between your own staff and team, you will fail. That is huge. And I think it's just this kind of intuition, relationship building, being kind, but I understand being, there's a tendency, I think, sometimes for women in the older generation, and I don't want to make it just everyone in the women older generation, but I understand. I understood Hillary a lot better this last cycle than I did the first time she ran for president. The first time she ran for president, I was with President Obama, and I didn't understand Hillary. But the second time, I was a lot older, and I actually had been in positions where I understood where she was coming from. To be the only woman in the room back in the early 90s, or to be doing the things she did, was totally out of her element, and not a lot of women doing that. So I think over time, there are women who kind of harden themselves or guard themselves because it's a necessity to do this job. And I find myself sometimes that guard goes up, that distrust goes up, that hardness to cover yourself going on the battlefield comes up. But you've got to find ways to stay connected to the work, grounded to the work, authentic to the work, to not harden yourself, because voters can feel that. People that you're trying to build relationships with, other elected officials that you need, can feel that. And if you go through that approach through life, you're not going to get very far.
So I would just say on a personal note that I'm part of that earlier generation, as our listeners know, and that you're speaking of, and many times experienced being the only woman in the room. And I say constantly, wherever I can, it is so much better when you can share the work with other women and let your guard down. And if you're feeling threatened, to talk about it. So I'm really glad you mentioned that.
And I understand, because I think it was a totally different time. And I've seen progress, but still, 4 years ago or 3 years ago, I found myself maybe 2 other women in the room. And it was so helpful to leave that meeting and go immediately and find them and ask, how to navigate something, or how we were going to get our principal to turn their thinking or turn their direction. So it's getting a little easier, but we still have ways to go. My senior staff often laughs. We'll have a conversation like, oh, it was exhausting today. I had to go out in the real world and deal with these other offices who aren't female-led, or, and so we laugh about it, but it's still true. We still have work to go, but we have to understand the women that are ahead of us and the things that they've done and pay homage to that. And then the women that are coming up with me now at this age, and find our bridges to each other and support each other in the best way that we can.
Well, speaking of supporting each other, we know that you've got lots to do. You've told us some of it. I hope you'll come back and keep us posted. So
yes.
As you
I love that
wonderful symposium and all the rest of it. So, Kelly, any final words? And then we say thank you.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled to see, Chicago and really in a lot of ways, Illinois being led by women. I think it's so amazing to see. And so I love the work that you're doing and the ways that you're all working to try to make government more accessible. And, it's just really fantastic. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Rebecca. This is all things women is my favorite thing, my topic. So I'm happy to come anytime. Thank you for thinking of me today.
Thank you.
Right.
The Vote Her In segment is a collaboration of Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. Our theme song is called Are You Listening off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.